Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're talking about one of the most important concepts in the entire Rich Dad philosophy, assets versus liabilities. It sounds simple, buy assets, avoid liabilities, but if it were that easy, everyone would be wealthy. The reality is that many people spend years buying things that they think are assets while their financial future quietly slips away. So today we're going to answer a critical question. How do you actually build assets instead of liabilities? And joining me today, as always, is Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner. And before we get into it, make sure you go to stockcastbonus.com, grab your free investing tools. If you want to learn how to build real wealth instead of just accumulating stuff, that's where you start. Andy, welcome back.
Man, great to be with you, Del. This is a great topic because I think you hit it on the head. People think, well, I just choose the asset instead of a liability, and it's a little bit more involved than that. So we'll dive in.
It is a little bit more involved than that, and I'm going to venture to say at some point we're going to talk about education being an asset, because it is. We talk about that every time.
Sure.
But stockcastbonus.com, probably the first asset people could get right now. What is in stockcastbonus.com?
What's nice about that asset is that it's not something that we charge for. So you can go to stockcastbonus.com. We've revamped that recently, and it's got a menu of. We used to just rotate different things in there, but we've just created a menu of education, classes, webinars, tools, downloads, ebooks, all kinds of cool stuff that you can dive into to whatever degree you choose to. And it's a great way to become organized, especially to act and not just to scroll or podcast. As valuable as that content is, it's great to have tools and plans and agendas and regimens to actually get people going. So that's what that's for.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's talk about assets versus liabilities. And maybe we should start with the beginning, the Rich Dad philosophy of what is an asset versus what is a liability. Maybe we can just start with defining those.
Yeah, I mean, accountants will look at this differently, and sometimes we redefine words, which is fine. But as long as we're clear on the jargon and we're not using jargon that people don't get, I love the simplicity of the way Robert says it. Accountants disagree, they go after him. Some accountants agree. But he says, look, an asset is something I buy that after I buy it, it puts cash in my pocket. Asset, put money in my pocket. Liabilities take money out. Now, if we went strictly with that, that really changes, like, for example, how we would look at a home that we live in, a residence. I've seen, I remember one time there was I think he was a medical doctor, so he was a smart guy. And Robert was teaching, and he said, your house is not really an asset. And this guy just went nuts because he had a big home and a lot of money in the home, very proud of it. He says, what do you mean? It's my biggest asset. It's a huge asset, and I own it, and it's worth a lot. Therefore, it's an asset. And I thought, be careful, dude. Robert's a Marine. If he has a weapon, he might get a little itchy, And it was interesting in that case that Robert just blew him off, and it was kind of like, hey, if you're rich, then what are you here for? If you know all this stuff, what do why listen to me? Go live your life, doctor man. But that's, doctors are going to do well, 6 figures maybe, a good 6 figures. But, Robert at the time, probably $100 million higher. I would listen to the man, So I don't argue with people. I learned that from Robert. I don't argue with people on those definitions. I just like that one for myself. An asset is something that I buy that puts money in my pocket, whether I work or not. And a liability is something I buy that's going to take money out of my pocket. And I think that's a great start.
Nice. Now, let's talk about liabilities that people purchase not realizing that they're a liability. They think it's an asset. Home is a great example of that, right?
Well, even maybe before that, what's interesting is I will ask people what takes more money out of their pocket than anything else. Like, what's your largest liability? And people say, well, it is my home. It's expensive. I spend a lot of money. It's the most expensive thing I've ever bought. Then they'll come in second place. The car is a liability, and they say it's probably my home, my car. And I says, well, have you ever thought about how much you actually pay in taxes and fees in the aggregate? Because if you were to add up all of the taxes, sales tax, property tax, luxury tax, hotel tax, gasoline tax, all the sin taxes, beer, cigarette tax, capital gain tax, luxury, winnings, income tax, social. I mean, it's the biggest liability of your life. And what do you get for that? Well, benefits of being a citizen, education, a public park, but it doesn't put money in your pocket. It's not something you buy that is putting money in your pocket. It takes money. So I'd say that my tax advisor, Tom Wilwright, who has a great book called Tax-Free Wealth, I think he's right. The fastest way to permanently reduce your expenses, and which would, of course, increase cash flow, would be to deal with your tax liability. And so I think that's when we talk about what a liability is. To me, that's always number one on the list. Now, to your question is confusing assets with liabilities. Is your spouse an asset? For me, I think the answer is yes, net. But I think, as you said, the big misconception is when we buy something that we think is worth a lot of money but doesn't produce cash flow. And I guess the question is Bitcoin an asset then? Because if I bought Bitcoin and I wasn't going to sell it, in other words, it was a machine that I didn't have to, because, if you buy a stock and sell it, you no longer have the asset. If you flip a house, the only way to make money on your residence is to sell it for a profit. And now you have nowhere to live. Well, the only way to make money on a Bitcoin is to sell it for a profit. And I shouldn't say that. You can lend them and you can do options on them, so that's more sophisticated. But that lens really helps you just ask questions about your own asset column, what you're trying to achieve. I think some assets can be a great hedge against inflation. For example, my gold would be the same. The only way for me to make money on my gold is to sell it. And if I sold it, there'd be a big profit there. But now I'd have no gold. And now the question would be, how long could I live on those profits? And it wouldn't be in perpetuity. Eventually, there'd be an ending to that, I would imagine, depending on how extravagant my lifestyle would be. So I really like the purity of that idea of saying, is this something that I'd buy like real estate or a stock that I get a distribution or a dividend, even if I don't sell the asset? And even if the price of the asset changes, there's a disconnection between the rent and the price of the home. I can still collect rent even if the price dipped that month. I can still collect the dividend even if the stock dipped that month. So those are important things to consider.
Thank you for sharing that. It's good to understand the difference between asset and liability, and maybe to take it a step further, why do we as a society buy so many liabilities? Why are we stuck in this culture of buying all these doodads and whatnot?
Well, I think that's a good thing. I think it's wonderful. I'm not saying that. I think there's a big problem here that if you say asset good, liability bad, liabilities are freaking awesome. Liabilities, my goal is the opposite of so many so-called gurus. For example, some will wag their finger at you and they'll say things like, well, a guy wrote a book and there's something in there called the latte factor. I don't remember the guy's name, but he goes, if you quit buying coffees at Starbucks and paying so much and switch to MJB, you'll be rich. And I'm like, the expense column is an important column. All of the columns could be viewed this way: income, expense, asset, liability. What if we didn't judge them as good or bad? Robert says this so beautifully. I don't have a right hand and a wrong hand. I have a right hand and a left hand. I don't have a right foot and a wrong foot. I have a right foot and a left. And my left hand is just a mirror image of my right, and they're both good. Or if I, get hit, they could both be bad on, whatever. So to say doodads are bad, well, what is the utility of the expense column? The quality of my life is in direct proportion to my expense column. The food that I eat is an expense. I can eat garbage or whole foods, organic. the other day I was in the grocery store and I grabbed a pepper from the organic section. It was $3.50 for that pepper. I don't know what the non-organic pepper was because I'm not buying it. I don't know what they cost, but I know it was less. First-class tickets are non-negotiable for me at a minimum. I just don't fly coach. I'm 6'8". I'm not going to do that to me or the person next to me. We're like, oh, I got to sit by this guy. So that's a liability. My goal is to increase my expenses every single year because inflation will increase my expenses anyway every year. I should plan to accommodate that, not fight it. The health care that I provide for my wife and children is an expense. There are different qualities of health care. The vehicles that I drive, the home that I live in, represents my quality of life. So doodads are freaking awesome. It isn't that they're good or bad. It's that I need to know the difference. Robert never says I can't afford it when there's a doodad. Never. It's a rule in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You're not allowed to say that doodad is too expensive. Like a Porsche is a doodad. And he used to think Porsches were cool. When he wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he thought Porsche was it. Now he thinks Porsche is a Volkswagen. Now it's a Lamborghini or a McLaren or, whatever he drives. He wouldn't be caught dead in a Porsche anymore. I guess unless it was vintage or something. But the point being is we don't say I can't afford it. We say, how can I afford it? Because the liabilities and the doodads reflect our quality of life.
What a great way of
spend. So I'm planning to. I want a wealth plan that accommodates spending more money. I don't want a wealth plan that says I can't go and I'm not a coffee drinker, but if I was, I would want to go to Starbucks. I think I don't know, but you get the point.
I think that's a great point right there. Expanding, it's not that it's right or wrong. It's just let's get more assets to pay for the things that we enjoy. I think that's really what it is. Well, let's do this. Speaking of assets, let's go to break. Listener, if building wealth is really about acquiring assets, the next question becomes what assets should people actually be focusing on? So when we come back, Andy's going to break down the assets that create cash flow, financial freedom, and long-term wealth. And don't forget, go to stockcastbonus.com and download your free investing resources. That's where financial education becomes financial action. Stick around. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it. And it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
Welcome back to Rich Dad StockCast. Andy, let's get practical. If someone wants to start building assets immediately, where do they begin?
You mentioned in the earlier segment that education would be a big component of it. It is, so we can start there, but that's not the only component. One of the things that I find myself speaking about more and more when I'm asked about this stuff, and I just lean a lot on what I learned from Kim Kiyosaki, Robert Kiyosaki, Blair, Kenny, all these guys that I learned from, is the idea of personal development. And that education is a component of that, but it's not all of it. Warren Buffett talks about temperament, and I do believe there's an element of discipline. So I think we wouldn't do ourselves harm to, in this second segment, to address three of those things. What is, how does education assist and facilitate buying assets? And how does ignorance inhibit it and cost you money? And we might find that education is a superior asset. It's one of our greatest assets. And the ignorance is a liability. If you take the definition of something that I buy that puts money in my pocket, education could absolutely fit that bill. If we look at things that take money out of our pocket, ignorance may take out more money than taxes. Because if you're paying lots of taxes, that's a sign that I don't understand the tax laws. So education versus ignorance. But if we started with discipline, the Cashflow Academy is not a place to go to get discipline. We expect that to be there in the same way that a basketball player would show up to a tryout with enthusiasm for the game and being willing to play hard. As a coach, I'm not going to recruit a kid on my basketball squad that doesn't play hard. I'm not going to teach that. If you don't want to play hard, then don't show. When Marcy and I got married, I had a really tough love lesson. Excuse me, and it blessed my life. We were living in a basement apartment. I was making probably $8, $9 an hour. She was making minimum wage. Back then was probably $5.50. So we got $14 an hour between the two of us the day we're married. Move into a basement apartment, driving a beater car, trying to figure it out. I want to be rich. So I do what Robert did. I find a friend who has a rich dad. And my first rich dad's name was Lynn. And I'm still friends with his son today, who became insanely rich. And so it's just my own little rich dad story. It really is exactly a mirror image of Robert's story. So I go make an appointment in his office, and he was in stocks. And he had a lot of stocks. And I said, well, we're here to be rich. Will you teach us? He goes, well, how much money do you have to invest? I said, well, we don't have any. That's where you come in. We have no money. And I see a lot of people with that same mentality I had, thinking, well, I don't have any money, so I just need to learn and automatically have some. He goes, you know what? Get out of my office. You don't want to be rich. I said, what do you mean? He goes, oh, everyone says they want to be rich, but you don't want to be rich because you don't want to invest. You see, Andy, if you can't save, you can't invest. You either have to raise capital or save. But the money has to come from somewhere to buy the assets. You either got to go out and raise capital and walk in here with $10,000 you just raised, or walk in here with $10,000 you just saved. But whether you get it for money you raised or whether you get it for, Kim says only lazy people would use their own money, and that's true. But either way, that both of those would take a discipline to do. And the raising money takes discipline and skill. Now, saving money doesn't take any skill at all. You do what we talked about in the last segment, which I hate, which is reducing your expenses to have more money to invest. And if you want to go that route, you can. But if you come to me the way I came to my mentor and say, I have no money, you have a discipline issue first, guaranteed. You cannot live, especially if you live in the United States. If you're 50, 60 years old, let's say, and you say, I don't have any money. You've lived in the greatest country in the world at the greatest time in the world with more abundance. There's more money. We're printing trillions. There's money swimming everywhere. We're swimming in it, and we haven't saved any. I can't help that person. That's not an education issue. That's a discipline issue. So we can cross that off the list and move to something better than discipline. But that's the first thing. There needs to be. Robert was awesome because he was a Marine. And he's extremely disciplined in a lot of areas because of it. It's the military, and I need to be careful because the Marines is not the military. It's a part of the military, but it's a different level than just saying military. I mean, those guys have discipline that are, SEALs, they're different than enlisted, right? So discipline.
All right. So we have discipline. We build discipline. Now we want to buy assets. What are some of the most accessible assets that the average person can begin buying today? Is it stocks? Is it businesses? Is it real estate? Is it intellectual property? What can the average person buy starting today?
I think Kim Kiyosaki did the best job of this that I'd ever seen. We were in Chile, and my kids were with us. Or no, it wasn't Chile. It was Argentina. Excuse me. We're in Argentina, and my kids were with us, and it was nice because, everyone else is going through a translator, but my kids understood English. And she told these people, she says, if you've come here having Rich Dad, Poor Dad read, and you have anything in your asset column, where should you start? Just exactly like pretty much what you said, right? Where does the guy with nothing start? She said, go buy an ounce of silver. Just go buy an ounce of silver. And now you're at least hedged against the dollar. because a dollar is a liability. It takes money out of your pocket. It reduces value, right? It's getting less valuable in the asset column because so buy some silver. So at least you can basically stop that trend. And my kids were, I don't know, 8, 9 years old. And they went home and they took their lemonade money from their lemonade stand and they bought some silver. And it's crazy because silver, has done well. And they're like, wow. And now they've got some years behind them, right? And they're like, wow, this is really cool. So you could buy some silver and it's just at least you got something in your asset column other than a dollar, and other than nothing. My favorite thing I would tell people to buy that's easier than even silver is just buy a share so you can own a company. Go to a store that you like and look at your shopping cart and say, I have the confidence to buy these things. Wouldn't that translate into the confidence to be a seller of those things? In other words, if I look in my cart and I see Heinz ketchup, well, I have the confidence to buy it, and I'm looking around at other people are buying it. It's on the shelf every week, getting bought for my whole life. Do you think people are going to stop buying it tomorrow? So if I have the confidence to buy it and I enjoy the product as a consumer, why not flip that over and say, well, I would have the confidence to be an owner of this company. So go buy a share and get your 40 cents dividend, 40 cents on the share every quarter, by the way. So that's like $1.20 or whatever it is. So yeah, buy stuff. Go to Costco on a Saturday and get your crystal ball out and see if you can be a predictor. See how good you are at predicting the market. I'll make a prediction. Let's see how I do. We're going to go to Costco on Saturday and the frickin' parking lot's going to fill. And there's going to be people with cash in their wallet standing in line trying to get rid of their cash. They're angry that they can't get rid of it faster. They're like, geez, I'd like to spend my money faster. We got all these other people trying to spend it faster than me, and I have to wait to give my money away. I wish I could give it away faster. I wish they had more checkouts so they could take my money faster. And that's going to happen this Saturday. And if we have a recession, it's going to happen. If we have an economy that does well, it's going to happen because, day to day, you go to Costco, that's going to happen. So go buy a share of Costco stock and get on the other side of that freaking money. Real estate's a little harder to buy because you're now dealing with debt, and you're having to buy right because the only way you're going to have a real estate work well is with cash flow, or you're a spec home guy. So cash flow needs to have a margin of safety. We've got to understand the debt part, the equity part, the cash flow part, the what I would call, or Buffett would call, a margin of safety, to where we're buying it low enough that we could endure vicissitudes in the rental market so we don't wind up underwater. That one's a little more complex because you're adding the element of debt. And you buy a share of stock, you just have it, up, down, sideways, you've got the share. You buy something with debt, you've got to service the debt, which adds a level of complexity, which brings us to the other two things, beyond discipline: education, temperament. And Warren Buffett thinks temperament is the biggest one of the three. He thinks temperament's the biggest one. I don't know that I disagree. That we can help you with. We can't help you with discipline. That's just integrity in a moment of choice, right? I could do this or I could do this, and I have integrity to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. It's clear. Discipline's when the choice is clear, right? I eat the cookie or I eat the celery. That's it. What do I choose? It's not an education problem. Temperament is a little different, to handle vicissitudes of the market, to handle the fears and the greeds, to be in a room where everybody else is going crazy and to keep your cool. That's a temperament issue, a little different than discipline. So those three things, discipline, temperament, and education, you get those three working on yourself, all of a sudden you realize, I'm in a personal development program. More discipline, better temperament, learning more. It looks like it is exactly what Robert, Blair, Kim, Kenny, Tom, Garrett, Josh, Lisa, every one of them. Andy, you need to get better. Oh, okay. Andy, you really do. You need to get better. You need to be more of all of those things. Work on yourself. And that's really true. When you decide to become an investor, you are engaging in a personal development program, whether we know it or not.
That's amazing right there. Now, speaking of working on yourself, if someone wants to work on themselves, and this is my final question, if they want to work on themselves, shift from liabilities to building assets, what's the first action they should take this week?
Well, I hate to dodge that question. I won't, so I'll postpone it. But there's one important thing we have to say about buying assets. There's two things I want to have. I want to have lots of assets, and I want to have lots and lots of liabilities, and I want to have lots of doodads. I want a great life. I want first-class tickets. I want to drive a nice car, maybe not a Ferrari because I don't fit, but a Hummer, stuff like that. I want good food. I want doodads. So that's having. I want lots of debt because that allows me to buy assets. So I want to have a lot of debt. I want to have a lot of assets. I want to have a good lifestyle. I want to have freedom. I want to have a sense of accomplishment. I want to have all that stuff. So this podcast has been about having, and that's the wrong order because people say, well, what do I do to have that stuff? That's the wrong order. B, personal development. Be an investor. Then you can do investing, and then you can have investments. So the crux of the podcast is, how do I buy assets? Well, be an investor, then you can do investing, then you can have assets. And that might be the simplest and best way to round that thing out, to say, how do I go get assets? Be an investor. That's really important. And that is the answer to the question. So all of a sudden, we move from the realm of advice, of being told what to buy, to working on who you become. Because advice doesn't facilitate personal development because it takes away discipline, temperament, and education and puts it on someone who has those things supposedly and charges you money to do it for you, which is a liability. Advice takes money out of your pocket. Advice costs money. Bad advice, free advice costs a lot of money. Good advice costs a lot of money. It's a liability. It takes it out of your pocket. That's why we choose to be the investor, to do the investing, to have the investments rather than try to have advice. So that's good stuff. Now, first steps, well, it's always the same. Go to stockcastbonus.com. There, I gave it to you. You can plug that in.
There we go. I love it. Well, let's just, as we wrap up, the difference between financial struggle and financial freedom often comes down to one question. Are you buying assets or are you buying liabilities? The wealthy understand that assets create cash flow, freedom, and options. And the more assets you build, the less dependent you become on a paycheck. And again, big thank you to Andy Tanner for helping us to understand these foundational wealth building principles. And again, if you're ready to start building assets that generate income and opportunity, head over to stockcastbonus.com right now. You'll find free tools and resources designed to help you to become a smarter investor. So if this episode gave you any value, make sure you like it. Hit that little thumbs up button, subscribe, share it with someone who wants to build wealth the Rich Dad way. You're not here by accident. You're building something that most people won't. So stay smart, stay invested, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Del.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.